proudly sponsored by Premier Guns with Alex Sayer.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
How are you? Thanks for joining me.
I don't know. I'm surviving, I think, is what we call it.
Yeah.
It's been a tough week.
Just a little bit, but I don't want to focus on your suspension of the party, and I don't want to focus on the tweet. What I really wanted to ask you, because this isn't about that, it's about your thoughts on the vaccine. So I'm going to ask you where your doubts started to creep in and about that journey. But first of all, have you had the vaccine yourself?
I have, yes. I've had 2 doses of the now withdrawn AstraZeneca.
Okay, and did you have any ill effects yourself from that, Andrew?
Yes, I had nothing really after the first one. Second one, I had a pain in the shoulder for 3 or 4 days and didn't feel very well. But following that, I now suffer from allergies I never had before I had the vaccinations. I was 58 in October. I know it's unbelievable, but I'd never had any real allergies. And this summer I had a month of hay fever, solid, which I've never ever had before. And as soon as that went away, I ended up with hives all over my body, which is like a nettle rash, very itchy. And I've had to take antihistamines every day to control that.
I was going to ask you, are you currently on any medication now?
Well, I ran out of antihistamines, and it's eased off a bit, the hive. So now all I'm getting is very prickly lips in the morning. Feels like I've been sucking on a nettle.
Yeah.
It saves having to have any sort of injections in my lips to make them bigger. So it's eased off a bit, but I want to see what's happening. That I've only stopped taking the tablets for about a week.
Okay, so other than that, you're not on any other medication?
No.
Okay. So tell me about when you first started to have suspicions about the vaccine. Tell me about that process.
Well, I think it wasn't just the vaccine; it was the whole vaccine response by the government, the lockdowns. I voted against the last couple of lockdowns, including Plan B, and I would have voted against others. But I was assured by Number 10 and the Prime Minister that there had been a full impact assessment of the wider impact of lockdowns on society, not just those with COVID, and that it was all they've got to do the lockdowns. Well, unfortunately, as in so many things, that wasn't the truth. You know, I was in favour of the nudge department in Number 10. You know, simple messaging like. I think during the pandemic, I mean, it was clearly the nudge department had become the shove department, and I don't like being shoved around myself. I don't like people shoving my constituents around, and it was very clear that fear was being ramped up, and then we moved into a period where basically I think there's been an awful lot of fraud in the government during lockdown. I think there's been huge fraud over PPE, track and trace, and I've tried to expose some of it, and all I've had is the whistleblowers have been sacked.
So give me an example of that. Is it sort of the health secretary having shares in certain companies?
I think it's been a bit of a free for all, quite honestly. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of that, but I think there's been a lot of very dodgy deals done on. I mean, what sort of business would ever buy, 12,000 million pounds worth of out of date and defective goods and then pay for them and then burn them? And that's basically what the government are claiming it did over PPE. Well, I mean, that doesn't really happen in the real world. You don't pay for goods that are defective. You tell them to fetch them away, or you're going to charge them storage.
Did you feel that you were part of an inside ring that you didn't want to be a part of? Is this what's led to you stepping outside? Were you sort of getting caught up with this, and you feel that you can't?
No, I was watching what was going on, and it was beyond belief. And someone's made a decision which has cost the taxpayer more than 12 billion, because then this defective material was supposedly stored, and then it's being paid to be burnt. Okay. So it's probably cost about 14 billion with the way that the government run things. And no one's been sacked or sanctioned for losing that much, wasting that much taxpayers' money, which is all hard worked for. So we had all that. And then
what about the Nightingale hospitals, Andrew? Do you know anything about the Nightingale hospitals?
Well, they were set up and never used. But I had a whistleblower that came to me and informed me with evidence that huge numbers of PCR tests that were paid for by the NHS had disappeared from stock after they'd been paid for in the distribution thing.
Is there any way to improve this?
Yeah, well, my whistleblower was his computer. He was a civil servant. He came up to my house in Leicestershire, and he was so nervous he wouldn't email me the information. He brought it up, put his laptop up, and let me look at it. And I made him. We had Sunday lunch together, and we exposed it. And his computer was suspended the same day we exposed it.
Okay.
And we were talking about over 12 months, £860 million worth of PCR tests that had gone missing from the supply chain, paid for by the taxpayer. And he was sacked within 7 days. And then we got round to the parties and Partygate, and then you realise that, Number 10 knew everything about the science, and then they obviously weren't worried about having social distancing or wearing masks, but they were inflicting all this on everyone else. And that just shows how farcical it all is. And since then, I've spoken on pretty good terms with most of the cameramen who've interviewed me from various news outlets over the years, many hundreds of times. And the ones that have been into Number 10 during the lockdowns to film those daily briefings where everyone's spaced out, they said it was unbelievable. So they were only allowed to bring one person in. They got to be vaccinated. They got to be PCR tested. And they came in and he had to do the sound, the filming. So normally we'd have 3 or 4 from the BBC to film something like that, but I had to do it all myself. He said, and the farce is, he said, if I'd swung the camera around 180 degrees, behind me were dozens and dozens of young spads not wearing masks and all talking to each other, no social distancing. He said it was a complete pantomime. So all of that, we were told, was a complete pantomime from Number 10.
Okay, but let's just talk about the vaccine. Okay, because your concern, from what I gather, and don't let me put words in your mouth, please stop me if I'm wrong, is that you're worried that people are being used as a guinea pig for a vaccine which is no longer needed.
Yes. Whatever you think about COVID-19, 99.8 survival rate from probably the original Wuhan strain, as viruses normally do, and coronaviruses normally do, it mutated to become more transmissible but less pathogenic. It attenuated its pathogenicity in South Africa. The South African variant took over, which was Omicron. And then we had the debate about Plan B, which I took part in, and I voted against the masks, any further lockdowns, the mandates.
And do you have any sort of scientific background yourself, Andrew?
Yeah, I did. I studied biological sciences many decades ago at Nottingham University, specialised in genetics and behaviour. My final year's dissertation was on viruses and viroids.
Really? And
I did biochemistry subsidiary in the first year. So.
Okay, and you passed all those, and you got the certificates?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I still got the certificates. I got an upper second from Nottingham University, which is pretty good university. They did offer me the chance to stop on and do a PhD if I wanted to, but I decided to do something else instead. So yeah, I've kept very much interested in genetics, and when you start finding out that the American government, the US government, has got a patent on 4 of the amino acids that are in the spike protein, and lots of things for me don't add up. I mean, if the mRNA technology, clearly, Mr. Malone, Dr. Malone, who led the research into that, says it's not safe and shouldn't ever be used on humans. That's pretty damning. And if you look at it, the messenger ribonucleic acid is something that normally forms in the body in a cell. It takes it when the DNA splits.
DNA, isn't it?
But well, it's not. It's the DNA is your DNA. When that splits, you get RNA is produced, and that codes three base pairs code for a protein, an amino acid, and that's how your body does that. Well, introducing a foreign messenger RNA for the spike protein, I mean, it doesn't really make sense, because everybody knows that the spike protein is the easiest part, is the part of the virus that mutates the quickest. It takes a while to produce an mRNA, and even if the technology was safe and effective, why would you choose the spike protein? Because by the time you've produced it, you'll drive a mutation, which means it'll be completely ineffective, unless you want to have the fact that you have to produce another one. Now, I had a Zoom meeting with Pfizer in November 20, before the vaccine started being rolled out, and it was shocking. I mean, they told a group of MPs, and I was one of them, that you'll have to take these vaccines every 3 months for the rest of your life.
Okay. So do you think this is a money-making thing from the big pharma?
Well, they certainly have made a lot of money. I mean, Pfizer made $45 billion last year out of the vaccine. That's about half of their worldwide profits. And now, I mean, all big pharma, they're being told, because of apparently the unexplained heart problems, that everyone can have statins. Well, that's another big earner for big pharma.
Yeah, well, let's just talk about side effects for a moment. You've had a lot of concerns about side effects. Is it that you feel that these are being covered up?
I think what we know is that these, by their own admission, I mean, these vaccines, and they're not really vaccines. They had to change the definition of vaccine. They're actually, it's gene technology. These treatments, they had to push them through very quickly. They haven't gone through all the normal trials any medication or treatment normally would. It would take years and years and years. Obviously, they came out in just over a year. So they haven't been through all the trials they should have been. And you would have expected that, okay, if it's an emergency and they're on emergency use authorization, you would expect, since they haven't been through the testing, that you'd have a very rigorous monitoring of side effects, wouldn't you?
Yes, you would expect that, Andrew.
Yeah, that would be completely, I think, reasonable to do that. Well, what we have with the yellow card system is it's claimed that it's, by the people who set it up, that this is, well, it's not very effective and it's not very consistent. And what we do probably know by the admissions of previous yellow card systems on the MHRA, from the MHRA, is that it's probably 90% underreported. Well, it's just about 500,000 reports of adverse effects. Well, if that's underreported by 90%, I'm sure your listeners can work out that's a lot of people. And the same around the world. You know, the Americans have got their VAERS system, and it's not, you know, doctors, physicians are not instructed that they must report every adverse event. And a lot of people have contacted me, and they're absolutely convinced that they've lost relatives due to the vaccine. It's never been reported on the yellow card system in the UK. Okay,
so you've taken the step to speak out about this in Parliament.
Well, what pushed me, Alex, is when the MHRA recommended 5 weeks ago, that these vaccines were safe to use on children down to 6 months of age, which I think is abhorrent. There's no risk to them whatsoever. Absolutely minuscule. In the test that we saw was released, was released yesterday, the Taiwan test of 12 to 18-year-olds. This has been suppressed for over a year. The data has just come out today, peer-reviewed. 17% of those who took, and it was a sample of about 4,000, mostly boys, 17% suffered heart problems following 2 doses of vaccine. 17%.
Really? And you've got that written down, have you?
Yeah, that's on my website, on my Twitter now. That paper's out there. Been suppressed for a year. It can't be the vaccine. It can't have having COVID, because none of them had COVID when they were tested on that vaccine. That's how long they've suppressed that report. Okay. And every bit of evidence I'm seeing shows me that the younger the person who has the vaccine, the more chance and the more serious the adverse events will be.
Okay, because they have withdrawn some of the vaccines, haven't they? So they must have been aware that there was some.
They withdrew the AstraZeneca one that I had, and many people had in the UK. They quietly withdrew that.
They did.
That was down to side effects mostly of clotting, blood clots, embolisms. It was already banned quite quickly. It was banned in Europe, but the Pfizer data, when you analyse, and I've been through this paper with top cardiologist Asim Malhotra. He produced a paper which he presented to me back in October. If you actually, Pfizer tried to hide their original trial data. It was forced out by the US Supreme Court. They wanted, I think, a 75-year gagging order on it. I'm not surprised when you read it. When you analyse it, in their own surveys for testing the vaccine, 1 in 800 serious events, and they only followed the recipients of the vaccine for 8 weeks. So anyone who had a serious event post 8 weeks wouldn't have been picked up in that trial. But that's Pfizer's own data. Well, you know, swine flu, the vaccine was withdrawn of an instance of 1 in 100,000 adults, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and the rotavirus vaccine was withdrawn.
That was withdrawn.
One in 10,000 children got a bowel obstruction as a result of taking that. 1 in 10,000. We're talking for an American paper on the under fives, and goodness knows who handed their under fives over for testing anywhere on an experimental drug. And that was a survey of 6,500 under fives. In the Journal of American Medical Associations, 1 in 200 was still hospitalized 3 months after the injection.
Goodness,
I mean, this is criminal. This is criminal, and it just can't happen. And that's why I asked the Prime Minister. That's why I asked the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions many weeks ago to overturn the recommendation of the MHRA and to protect at least the small children from this. And the vaccines are not safe. They're not effective. We were lied to about that. They told us, take the vaccine and you will be protected and you won't transmit it. And none of that was true. None of that was true. I've had COVID twice. I'm double vaccinated. I had it before I was vaccinated. I had 2 jabs, and I've had it since. So it doesn't work.
You were actually one of the first people to get it, weren't you? I seem to remember. You caught it in the House of Commons, didn't you?
Yes, it went round. And what we do know as well is that natural immunity from having had it has never been taken into account, and it would be at least 3.5 times better, maybe multiples of that better than ever having any vaccine. So if you've got natural immunity from having had it, no one should have had the vaccine. And everyone has pretty much been exposed to it, including young children. So why on earth would you want to expose them to I calculated on the Taiwan paper that came out, it's on my Twitter today, that the risks of serious harm from the vaccine are 200 times higher than the risks from COVID. I mean, this is not close. This is not a marginal call for the government. And this is in the age group 12 to 18. And I think it'll be far worse than that in younger children, because their hearts are so small and they haven't got any development of their immune system.
And we're giving them something which isn't natural. So
and it's not necessary. They don't need it.
It's not necessary. Do you feel that the government is trapped and that they can't sort of come out and they're having to keep up a facade?
I think a lot of reputations, money, and are on the line, and I think they're doubling down instead of doing the right thing. And
let's take a moment.
It's not going to end well, Alex.
Let's take a moment to talk about your reputation and your situation. Yeah, it hasn't been well received, has it?
What?
Your reaction to this, your input into this?
I think it's been pretty well received by the public. It hasn't been well received by members of the government, but no, because I mean they're the ones who've got everything to lose.
And is it fair to say
I've been savaged. I've been savaged by Sajid Javid and Matt Hancock. I mean, you might recall they were the two former health secretaries.
But do you feel that it's fair to say that your understanding and thought process of this has come from the scientific papers in the first place? Your opinion is as a result.
Well, I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, I sent the papers which showed that an effective treatment for the coronavirus infection could be ivermectin and hydrochloroquine.
Yeah.
I sent the hydrochloroquine papers to the chief whip, Mark Spencer, and said, look, the government scientists need to look at this. And I also sent it to Jeremy Hunt, who at the time, he was the chairman of the Health Select Committee, and he former 7 years running the health service secretary. And I rang him up afterwards and said, Jeremy, I've sent these important papers. This is back in February 20. Yeah. So I've sent you these important papers. You need to look at these treatments. We can, could be very useful. And Jeremy Hunt said to me on the phone, Andrew, don't send me scientific papers. I don't know how to read them. I don't understand them. And the man had been health secretary for 7 years. I mean, I just gave up, and I rang Spencer up, who's a farmer, and said, look, you need to get this. I never heard anything back from them. Okay. You see, if we'd used ivermectin and hydrochloroquine and other treatments, they had to be banned because there's no, you wouldn't be able to get an emergency authorization if there's an existing treatment available, and they were.
Okay, no, that's interesting. Thank you for that. I just want to talk very briefly about any support. You see, what I don't understand is they've withdrawn the whip from you because you've spoken out over something which isn't A, singing to the government song, or B, the party line. But that doesn't really seem to make sense. It doesn't seem to be much of a punishment having the whip removed when you're already going against the whip. How does that work?
Well, I'll jump off a backbencher. I might be on the government benches, but I'm not a minister, so I'm not part of the government. My job is to hold the government to account and protect the best interests of my constituents and the wider British public. And I think that's exactly what I'm doing. I mean, I spent 12 years campaigning to prove that the sub-postmasters weren't guilty of the fraud, and it was down to the defective Horizon computer. It took 12 years to do that. We haven't got 12 years because now they're looking at injecting a experimental vaccine into very young children, which is going to be probably, if I had to estimate it, 25% will have serious problems immediately.
Okay, this is why you're going.
When you start talking about people say it's mild myocarditis. Let's be clear. Heart muscle never regenerates. You've only got one set of it. You'll have heart scar. There is no such thing as mild myocarditis. You've got it for the rest of your life if it doesn't kill you, and it will certainly be life shortening. So there's no mild about it. Yeah. Brain cells and heart muscle cells do not reproduce. You've got what you've got, and that's it.
Okay. Let me just ask you this then about just one more thing about the party. In that instance where they've withdrawn the whip from you, they've said that you're not part of the Conservative Party anymore.
They also said I was a racist and an anti-Semite, apparently.
Well, I can't comment on that, and I don't intend to, and I don't expect you to either. Did they offer you any support? Is there any counselling? Is there any help for somebody who's in your position?
No, they didn't offer me any support. And what's even worse than that, it was really upsetting to some of my staff. One lady who works for me, who will remain nameless, I mean, she basically cried for 2 days over that because she just couldn't believe what was going on.
But they will still work with you. You still keep the same office staff, do you?
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add today, Andrew?
Well, what I would say is that since I've been banging the drum for vaccine harms, I've spoken to a lot of doctors. I've had a lot of emails from a lot of people in the medical profession, and there's a lot of intimidation. They're very, very scared to speak out. I've been informed yesterday that from a source in the legal profession that a top team of London lawyers have now been employed by the government to suppress doctors who want to speak out about vaccine harms to their patients.
It's something that's worth keeping an eye on, and it's interesting.
Well, I know the name. I know the name of the firm, and there'll be a written question going in as soon as I'm able to.
There are a lot of doctors and nurses that hadn't had the vaccine.
Well, I can tell you now that I had an email from a very top doctor in London who will remain nameless, of a very well-known group of hospitals, and he said that it's about 35%, only about 35% of NHS staff will take the boosters. Okay. Now that's a lot, so it's 65% plus vaccine hesitancy amongst NHS staff. Well, I mean, yeah. At the end of the day, what I would say to is to anybody thinking about taking another booster or getting vaccinated or certainly having any vaccines for their children, look at all the data, look at the science, look at what's out there, and quite honestly, make your own informed decision. But you need to look at all the facts and look and balance the risk off about what is the risk to your child from. So in the 12 to 18-year-olds, the chance of death from the original, more pathogenic, full-strength Wuhan strain of COVID-19 was 1 in 2 million. I would suggest it's probably something like 1 in 4 million now. Balance that against the risks of 17% of having heart issues after the second jab. It's not a difficult decision to come to.
No, it isn't.
And it shouldn't be a difficult decision for the government to come to withdraw, certainly suspend the jabs and the boosters while we do some proper scientific analysis. You know, the American, in the Senate Investigations Committee, they're calling in witnesses and talking about all of these matters. Why aren't we having an investigation in a select committee in the UK? Why is the government given protection from claim against to very wealthy pharmaceutical manufacturers, so you can't claim against the harms that their products producing? And why at the same time are they apparently looking to silence and throw out of Parliament MPs who want to talk about the harms that these so-called vaccines are inducing in our population? And at the end of the day, for the overwhelming majority of people in this country, and especially young people, the chance of any harm from the current mutations, variants of COVID-19 are absolutely minuscule, and the risks are far too high. It doesn't make scientific sense. It doesn't make medical sense. The government's on the wrong side of medical ethics, on the wrong side of scientific data, and ultimately it will be on the wrong side of history. And it's not, can't be done in my name. Whatever they do to me, whether they throw me out of Parliament, it's not going to be done in my name.
No. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Take care of yourself, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With Alex Sayer.